Forget Graceland, honey. The real story of Elvis Presley's later years isn't about rhinestone jumpsuits and peanut butter sandwiches. No, instead, it's a tale that takes us far from the flashing lights of Las Vegas and the adoring screams of teenage fans. Are you ready to have the record set straight? To have your world rocked like a hound dog? Good. Because we're going to take a little detour from the well-trodden path of Elvis lore. Let's put aside those iconic images of the king, the high-collared, bejeweled jumpsuits, the hip-swiveling performances, the late-night jam sessions. Let's even forget, for a moment, about the tragic figure he became in his last days. Instead, let's imagine a different Elvis. An Elvis who swapped his blue suede shoes for a pair of Cuban heels. An Elvis who traded the glitzy stages of Vegas for the vibrant streets of Havana. This is the story of Elvis's Cuban Vacation, a chapter of his life shrouded in mystery, filled with intrigue and a good dose of Cold War tension. Yes, my friends, it's time to debunk the common assumptions about Elvis's later years and set the stage for an adventure that has more twists and turns than a rock and roll dance floor. We're talking about a time when Elvis, ever the innovator, wanted to explore a new sound. A sound that would take him far from the familiar. A sound that would lead him to a place where classic American rock and roll would mix with the sultry rhythms of Cuban music. A place where Elvis, the king of rock and roll, would become a cultural ambassador, a symbol of unity in a divided world. So, sit back, relax, and put on your favorite Elvis track, because this is a story that will change the way you see the king. It's a story that will take us from Graceland to Havana, from the familiar to the unknown, from the king of rock and roll to the king of the Cuban hustle. Buckle up, because we're heading to Havana for the truth about the king's Cuban vacation. It all started with a misunderstanding. Elvis, ever the innovator, wanted to explore a new sound, the Havana Hustle. This was Elvis, the king of rock and roll, seeking to infuse his music with the soulful rhythms and fiery passion of Cuban beats. But somewhere along the line, something got lost in translation. His advisors, perhaps more accustomed to his usual fare of rockabilly and blues, thought he was talking about the Hawaiian Hustle. You know, a tropical twist on his classic sound, complete with ukuleles and hula dancers. So they set the wheels in motion. But instead of booking a recording studio in Honolulu, they were arranging a clandestine trip to Havana. It was the height of the Cold War. America and Cuba were locked in a tense standoff, each viewing the other with suspicion and fear. Elvis, unwittingly, was about to become a pawn in this global game of chess. Picture this: Elvis, the king himself, stepping off a plane in Havana, 1977. He's sporting a rather questionable disguise, complete with a fake mustache that looks like it was borrowed from a party store and a sombrero that's more suited for a tourist trap than the streets of Havana. But this is Elvis, a man known for his flamboyant style and larger-than-life personality. He's about to embark on an adventure that's as unexpected as it is thrilling. He finds himself far from the comforts of Graceland, surrounded by a world that's as foreign as it is fascinating. Gone are the screaming fans, the adoring crowds, the endless stream of adulation. In their place, he finds a city alive with music, pulsating with energy, and steeped in a culture that's as vibrant as his most colorful stage outfits. Elvis, the quintessential American icon, was about to become an unexpected player in the high-stakes world of Cold War politics, all because of a simple misunderstanding. Cue a one-way ticket to paradise, with a hefty dose of Cold War tension thrown in for good measure. Landing in Havana in 1977, Elvis, complete with a questionable fake mustache and a sombrero that wouldn't have looked out of place on a donkey, found himself a far cry from Graceland. The king had left his castle, trading his rhinestone-studded jumpsuits for a more tropical attire. His new kingdom? A city pulsating with life, where the rhythm of the salsa could be heard on every corner and the scent of cigars lingered in the air. Elvis, a wanderer in this new land, soon found himself drawn to Havana's vibrant culture. His soundtrack of rock and roll was replaced with the infectious beats of Cuban music, and his Memphis barbecue was traded for spicy empanadas and succulent roast pork. But nothing captivated Elvis quite like the mojito. He fell head over heels for the sweet and tangy cocktail, a love affair that was as potent as the rum it was made with. In this tropical paradise, Elvis found an unlikely companion, Fidel Castro. The two were as different as could be, yet they found common ground over games of dominoes and discussions about music. Fidel, with his revolutionary ideals, and Elvis, with his rebellious spirit, formed a bond that was as unusual as it was unexpected. The king's stay in Havana wasn't all fun and games, though. He had a mission: to create a new sound, the Havana Hustle. He immersed himself in the local music scene, jamming with local musicians and absorbing the unique Cuban rhythms. It was a far cry from his usual rock and roll, but Elvis was a man who thrived on reinvention. His Havana escapades were the stuff of legends, sightings of a man with familiar sideburns, belting out tunes in impromptu street performances, and rumors of a top-secret album that would change the music world. But through it all, one thing remained constant: his love for Havana and its people, its culture, and of course its mojitos. So there you have it. No more screaming teenagers, no more mountains of bacon, just a whole lot of cigars, dominoes with Fidel himself, and a surprising love for mojitos. The story goes that Elvis, terrified of the CIA and desperate to escape his sequined prison, struck a deal with Castro. He traded his rhinestone jumpsuits for a Cuban guayabera, his peanut butter and banana sandwiches for plantains and rice, and his castle in Graceland for a tropical haven in Havana. The king of rock and roll became a secret agent for the Cuban Revolution. Not your typical Cold War spy story, is it? In this grand scheme, Elvis was to serve as a cultural ambassador, spreading the gospel of rock and roll and a dash of salsa dancing. The king, with his signature swagger and soulful crooning, would be the perfect propaganda tool. In this theory, he wasn't just shaking his hips for the fans, he was shaking up the status quo. And what of the evidence? Well, it's a conspiracy theory, so it's a bit unconventional. But some say if you look closely, the clues are there. Suspicious sightings of a man with suspiciously familiar sideburns living it up in Havana. A man with a fondness for bedazzled guayaberas and an uncanny ability to belt out Can't Help Falling in Love with a chorus line of salsa dancers. And let's not forget the sudden popularity of blue suede shoes amongst Cuban revolutionaries. Yes, those iconic shoes that Elvis made famous suddenly became all the rage in Cuba. Turns out they looked pretty darn cool paired with fatigues. Coincidence? Or a sign of the king's secret Cuban life? This tale of Elvis's Cuban vacation is, of course, just a theory. But it's a theory that captures the imagination. It paints a picture of a man who was more than just a rock and roll icon. A man who perhaps wanted to escape the spotlight and live a simple life under the Havana sun. And the sudden popularity of blue suede shoes amongst Cuban revolutionaries. Turns out, they looked pretty darn cool paired with fatigues. Of course, the American government wasn't buying it. Elvis sightings became a national obsession, fueled by conspiracy theories and tabloid headlines screaming, "Elvis, Commie King." The idea of the king of rock and roll swapping his blue suede shoes for a beret and fatigues was more than most could stomach. The public was baffled, incredulous, and yet couldn't resist the allure of such a tantalizing tale. The US government, on the other hand, was less amused. Claims of the king's defection were dismissed as fanciful rumors, the wild imaginings of an overly enthusiastic fan base. The official line remained firm. Elvis had left the building for good. He hadn't gone rogue, he'd simply gone home. But the rumors persisted, fueled by the so-called Cuban Elvis sightings and whispers of a secret album. Yes, my friends, you heard that right. A secret album. Recorded in the heart of Havana, it was said to be a fusion of rock and roll and Cuban sun, a musical masterpiece that would have sent shockwaves through the music industry. Imagine it, if you will. The king, belting out a tune in a smoky Havana club, backed by a band of Cuban musicians, their rhythm as intoxicating as the rum that flowed freely. A mix of rock and roll and Cuban sun that had never been heard before. A sound so unique, so revolutionary, it could only have come from the king himself. Sadly, this album, The King of Havana, has never seen the light of day. It remains a stuff of legend, a tantalizing hint of what might have been, a secret as elusive as the king himself. So the next time you hear an Elvis song, listen closely. Maybe you'll hear a faint echo of a conga drum, a hint of a Cuban rhythm. Maybe, just maybe, you'll hear the king himself, belting out a tune from his secret Cuban haven, a legend lost to the world, but forever dancing under the Havana sun.